On this issue, Jen, and you've written about it today, where you've talked about the imposition that masks have put on children in schools. What's your big concern about mask wearing in schools currently?
Well, I suppose when you look at it in the wider societal context, we have removed restrictions in most other aspects of society. It's possible to go to the pub, to a nightclub, meet up with a stranger, vaccinated or unvaccinated. The COVID pass is gone, but we're still expecting children to continue as if no change has been made at all. School is still a very different place for them, and I've been speaking to a lot of parents, teachers, child development experts, and students themselves over the last week in particular. And they want a bit of normality back too, and both. The child development experts that I spoke to in relation to the piece today, both of them reported seeing anecdotal evidence that masks were now, the burden of it was becoming greater, and that it was evident that children were feeling the effects, whether it be that you have perhaps the teenager who retreats behind their mask in school. I have parents reporting to me that their children are upset wearing masks, that they're not, their speech isn't coming on, that they're not mixing as well. There's the social, the emotional development, the emotional impacts, learning to read the social cues, perhaps not understanding. The teachers themselves telling me that they find the masks difficult to wear because they're trying to teach young children. They know children rely on this. Children with additional needs also struggling too. And I suppose when we look at it overall, it's the restrictions as a whole, I suppose, that I'm concerned about. I'd like to see them as a whole be lifted for children when we look, as I said, the wider societal context.
Do you think parents might be split on this? While there would be some parents and teachers indeed, and experts in this area who'd worry about development issues for children, there are other parents and families for whom this offers reassurance.
Absolutely, and that's why I think we need to move to a situation where it becomes about personal choice. And for parents who want their children to continue wearing masks, and teachers who want to continue wearing masks, that's acceptable for them to do so too. But it needs to go back to being personal responsibility and parental choice, and letting parents make the decision that they feel is best for their children.
Okay, Anthony, parental responsibility, personal choice. What do you think about the issue of masks in schools now? Is it time to let them go?
If you look at how schools are operating now, there are two things that are affecting schools. One is social distancing, because so many Irish classrooms are too small. So a lot of children are being disrupted because they're being taught somewhere outside the main classroom. They can't gather together as they did before. Masks are probably the lesser imposition. Right now, Omicron case rates are very high amongst children, and we're seeing increasing numbers of children admitted to the children's hospitals, which is relatively new, but just reflects a number of cases.
Yeah, tell us about that, because I think the numbers, we've got 4,160 COVID cases today, and we're hearing that 637 people are in hospital with COVID.
That's a fall over the last few weeks, which is great. But in children, the numbers have been going up. And that's the problem we've been facing, because the age profile of infections has shifted. So there's a lot more infections proportionately in younger people because they're not vaccinated. I think about half the children under 12 are vaccinated at the moment, which is not really enough. Now that number is going up, but the vaccination programme in children has been slowed by capacity issues as much as anything else. There's only so much the HSE public health people can do. We know, looking at it in a wider sense, that this virus is extraordinarily infectious. WHO are saying that it really has to be an imperative for every country to bring transmission numbers down. And in schools, we can do that with ventilation, air filtration, masks and social distancing.
So you think right now, with the vaccine uptake as it is in 5 to 12-year-olds, that now is not the time to remove masks?
No, I think now is not the time. There have been a number of investigations to answer the question that Jen raised about how does wearing masks affect children. And there aren't any really good large studies that I can find. The ones that I have found, and the advice, say, from people like CDC, who have consulted with US experts on this, is they believe the effects are very modest, and by comparison with the benefit of avoiding infection or reduce numbers of infections,
What
it's
do you
worth
say?
paying.
Yeah, what do you say to that,
There are
Jen?
a couple of points there. I suppose, first of all, only time is going to tell us about the consequences of the impacts. And it's only when we remove the restrictions will we really see what the consequences of this are and the long-term impacts. So I don't think we can necessarily take comfort from that. And the point of vaccination, and I say this having nailed my flag to the mast many times, my children are vaccinated. I completely support vaccination, including my 3, 5 to 11-year-olds. We had two of my children actually got their first vaccine, then got COVID, and obviously had to wait then till this weekend actually before they can get their second vaccination. But the uptake is low. And again, I'm speaking to parents about vaccination all the time, and there isn't much that can be done short of mandating vaccines to really encourage parents to take up. Yes, there's been delays because children had COVID. Yes, perhaps there's capacity issues. But at the same time, there are huge numbers of parents who do not want to get their children vaccinated.
Are you saying, Jen, there's no good time to do this,
There's
essentially?
not going to be, short of actually mandating vaccines for this age group, we are not going to, it's not possible to just insist that we have this sudden uptake. Parents have different reasons for being wary about vaccines. Perhaps their children have had COVID and they've seen quite a mild dose and they don't feel they want to go down that road.
What about the hospital numbers that Anthony mentioned there, and the fact that we are seeing a rise in children presenting with COVID in our hospitals?
What would be nice for parents, again, is to hear, is that with or because of COVID? That's the thing that would be helpful for parents to be aware. But we're also told the flu is more dangerous to children. As a parent who has recently been through it with her own kids, and I do appreciate every situation is very different and people have different reactions when they catch the virus and people have different experiences of it. But it was thankfully a very, very mild dose for all 7 of them, and they're different ages, and it was very mild, and I'm very relieved and very grateful for that.
Just to bring you back to a point that Jen made earlier, like when you leave the school environment, everything else is opened up, so adults can go out, they can live their lives, they can go to pubs, they can go to clubs, they can go out for meals, there's no mask wearing requirement there, and yet it is a very different, there's a disconnect in our schools. Would you accept that that's problematic and that it isn't actually working in controlling the virus?
There is a disconnect in our schools. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The question is what you should do about it. And our take on it would be that this is a nasty virus. It makes a small proportion of children extremely sick and some of them die. And that's happened in Ireland. Most children, you're absolutely right, most children get COVID, they're sick for a few days, they get better. But there's a proportion of children who don't. We don't know what the long-term effects of this virus are in children, and we're not going to know probably for another year. But the indications from the early studies in the US are that children get long COVID at a lower rate than adults, which is good. Again, it's very positive.
Would you put a time frame on it, though, in terms of for mask wearing? When you say, you know, now with the cases as they are, do you think the cases should have to go down to a certain number? Is there a time you have in mind, end of the school term?
I think we've been cutting ourselves. We're saying it's back to normal. We never go back to normal. I remember when HIV hit and everyone said, oh, this is a disaster. And actually, sexual habits changed permanently when HIV arrived and have never changed back. We have very little experience in rich Western countries of living with an endemic virus like COVID, but we used to. We used to live with TB. And again, I just about remember TB because it was going out as a major problem when I was a teenager. But COVID is here. It is not going to go away. It is not going to get any better. And
are you saying for as long as it is here,
yes,
that children should be wearing masks in school?
And that may be for the foreseeable future.
Right, OK.
And not just children. I think mask wearing should remain a common practice amongst adults as well, in appropriate situations, like public transport, like shops.
Right.